So we'll go around, why don't we do a quick round of introductions and just say your name and who you are. So I'm Sealy, welcome, everybody eat some pizza. White Center CDA.
Steve Daschel, I'm the Director of Southwest Youth and Family Services.
Mark Ellerbrook, King County Department of Community and Human Services. I manage the Housing and Community Development Program.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Quinn. I'm the Director of King County Department of Community and Human Services.
I'm Owen Salee. I live in White Center.
Michael Spear, Highland School Board for Board President.
Alan Painter with the King County Community Service Area Program.
Amelia Bowen, I am from White Center and I also teach at Mount Hill High School.
Rick Junk, Director of the White Center Food Bank, and I'd like to let the group know in advance that I only have 45 minutes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm Liz Eva. I'm a long-term resident of White Center and president of the North Carolina Unincorporated Area Council, and also on the Board of Commissioners of North Carolina Fire District. I'm not here representing that body.
Hi everyone, I'm Sybil Wynn. I'm also a resident of White Center and owner of Dempsey Coffee.
I'm Barbara Dopkin. I'm a resident of White Center. I'm also the vice president of the North Carolina Unincorporated Area Council.
My name is Patrick O'Neill. I'm a new member of White Center. I have a 2-year-old daughter and a son. So. I did get a call.
You might be leaving
Not
sooner than
something anyone
45
said.
minutes.
So I'm a future parent at the school, so we get involved.
My name is Carrie Kessler. I work for Public Health in Seattle and King County, and Lois Schimmer was sad that she couldn't be here tonight. She asked me to come in her place. I'm also a resident of White Center and a parent of 5 kids in this area.
I'm Mark Putnam with All Home. We work on homelessness countywide.
And, sorry, you never jumped. What did this mean?
Okay, I'm Keith Leonetti. I have a disc golf shop in the park here and also involved with a nonprofit organization called Discovery Open Spaces. Our main focus is educating the importance of recreation and education through fundamental teachings of disc golf. We assist the park with installing new courses and maintaining existing ones.
I'm Rosalind Hyde, and I am a community member. I own a house about a block away in the corner of one of them.
And I don't want you to be left out. So.
Oh, Christine Waldman, a 13-year resident and on the North Carolina Unincorporated Council.
Christine, feel free to scooch out.
Oh, that's okay.
And then,
My name is Aaron Garcia. I am the new White Center Promise Director for the CDA and the doorman.
so so first I want to say thank you to all of you for coming tonight and for the county allowing the space for this conversation to happen. Many of you, I'm assuming everybody in the room was also at that initial meeting. Rick wasn't there. And but many of us in the room were at that initial meeting, and it was there were a lot of emotions, and so and I think all were valid, and so just having the time to talk and build relationships with folks at the county, and find out who are the people who are going to be doing this work, but also for the county to find out these, see the faces of this community, and also figure out a way that we can, ultimately create win-win situations for everybody involved, including the homeless population. So I'm really thankful for all of you to come here tonight. I know we got a lot of stuff going on with families. So I really appreciate you guys taking some time out just to sit and have this conversation. So you have a copy of the agenda in front of you. We have 8:30 on our agenda. If it goes longer, that's fine too. But I just want folks to know that this is a process and that we can't, we would probably, there's lots of people who aren't in this room that probably have valid concerns as well. Well, that I know that have valid concerns as well. So we want to make sure that we're lifting up those other issues that have been brought up to many of us individually and or to our respective organizations and groups. So I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne to introduce herself and give you guys, let you guys know kind of how she's connected to this, and then we'll jump right into our meeting.
Great, thanks Celie. And I first wanted to thank Celie for her leadership here. You know, Celie, at the end of the meeting that we last had, you know, stood up and said, you know, let's get together. You made some kind of peacemaking offer, which I think was good and brave leadership because people have a range of perspectives, and so we gladly took Celie upon her offer to help facilitate a meeting. And our hope tonight is really just to be able to have a conversation, dialogue back and forth with folks. You know, in a large meeting of over 100 people, it's not really possible to have a dialogue. And so we have, you know, worked with Celie and tried to find people who have concerns about the shelter, about shelter locations, homelessness in general, and other people who feel like there's a strong need for it in the community so that we can begin to build a dialogue. What we're hoping to do tonight is to identify concerns and walk through what the specific concerns are that people have. I think we have a pretty good sense, but I think it will be good to really document what those concerns are for people who have talked to us and said it's necessary to have a shelter, to hear some of the reasons why they are saying that. And what we're hoping, and what we think will happen, what we're hoping will happen, is that we will have a list of items to work on, that we hope that we will have a list potentially of alternative sites. We are open to alternative sites, and then we will come back and have an additional conversation with this group again. A lot of times when we have conversations like this, people wonder, you know, so what is the role of the group? Are we making a decision? And you're not. We're asking you for your opinion and to engage in a dialogue that we can learn from. And so you don't feel like you need to take responsibility for a decision that something is going to be, you know, attributed to you, that you got to a certain place because of something you said at a meeting. It really is intended to have a good open dialogue. I really want to thank everyone. I know everybody's very busy. People have kids to come here tonight and have this conversation. So thank you in advance, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. The next person I'm going to turn it over to is Mark Putnam, who is the director of All Home, which is the community collaborative organization that is charged by the community with making homelessness rare, brief, and one time. And we asked him to ground us in what does the homeless situation look like in White Center, because as many of you know, we've expressed before, we've heard a lot over the course of time about people talking about people who are homeless in White Center and people asking for solutions. And so I'll turn it over to Mark.
Great. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I was here at the last meeting. I passed out just a few of these little posters that give you a sense of homelessness countywide. We don't have something nearly as pretty to show you specific to White Center, but I can share some data points which are coming around on this paper here, and feel free to ask any questions about that. So I think what I wanted to start with is saying that you know, homelessness is present in, we found in every zip code in King County. We're seeing people getting 211 calls or people who are coming into our shelters and saying they are from one of the many zip codes across the county. And I've been part of, and Adrienne and Mark as well, programs being, you know, processes like this, I guess, where programs are being placed in different parts of the county so that we can meet that need that's really countywide. So each year we do a count. So I'll give you a couple, I'll try to explain the data sources and tell me if there's any confusion. But the first data point is from the one-night count, not the count either, but one-night count. So in January we do an annual count We do, it's a visual count primarily. Teams of volunteers go out and see who's living outside, either on buses, on sidewalks, on benches, tents, cars. We do a methodology for counting and estimating that. And last year, that count was at the highest it's ever been, so 10,688, up about, whatever that is, 15%, I think, from 2015. Our unsheltered count went up to 4,505. It was 3,700 the year before. And we do count, we don't count every inch of the county, as you can imagine. It's a large county. So we do kind of known areas. And we group them into quadrants, no, not quadrants, more than just four, but sections, I guess, of the county, including southwest King County. And so in 2016, that was 315. In 2015, that same area was 209. And of that, that year we did separate and determine that 89 people were in White Center within that geography, which is the maps on the back, the map that we're using for that. So just looking, taking an estimate of any shift that would have happened from 2015 to 16, estimating about 134 people last year were unsheltered in this area. Aside from Seattle, although the difference is quite big between Seattle and Southwest King County, but Southwest King County was the second largest. We also saw big increases in other parts outside of Seattle, so like East King County and South King County, and we saw the biggest rise last year in car campers. That was kind of the biggest rise. So the second data source is the homeless management information system. So anybody that accesses a shelter or any kind of housing program for the homeless, they need to provide some information, and that's our data system for that. We can tell their last known zip code, so we ask, where you live last, where's your last permanent address, and for these zip codes, these are the numbers that we got. And again, on the map on the back tells you a little bit about, there's not one zip code, as you probably well know, just for all of White Center, and so I hope this is self-explanatory, but 98146 is, this part of White Center is about 16% of the overall, that overall zip code. So again, not exact numbers here, but this gives you a sense of where there's some intersection there.
Mark, I have a quick question. What's the source of all this data?
This source, well, the first source is a count that we do. So that's the one-night count. The second source is the homeless management information system.
Okay.
And people experiencing homelessness give us this information, so it's self-reported.
Okay, and then 211.
Yeah, and then 211 is, if you don't know, it's a community call. If you're in need of services, you can call 211. And again, same stipulations there with the zip codes, but you can see that there were about 6,000 calls from those zip codes that must have been last year.
Yeah.
And then as far as shelters that we know of, there are two that are somewhat near White Center, but none here in White Center, one in West Seattle and one in Burien, both for women.
Can I ask, the 6,000 calls to 211 were all about housing, or that's just all calls?
That was all calls, I believe. Mark, do you have?
Let me check that. I don't know if that's all calls, but those are calls related to homeless services, so let me double check that.
That was my question.
Sure.
I looked up the 98106 zip code,
Mm-hmm.
and it runs a parallel surrounding Delridge, all the way nearly to West Admiral.
That's a big area.
Yes, much bigger than this indicates.
Well, this shows
map.
that part of, so basically this says, I think, part of 98106 that's in White Center is just 5% of 98106. So you're right, it's only 1/20th of that whole zip code.
And also the similar situation with 98168. It goes considerably further east
That's right.
than this map.
So it says
indicates.
here it's 4% of 98168.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, this is imperfect data because there's not one zip code for the White Center area. So the back explains that a little bit further. Just has the map and then has some of the boundaries and percentages in each zip code.
Just a quick question. How much do you think, given the fact that there's less and less affordable housing in Seattle and families being pushed south to South King County, how much do you think attributes to this data on Jim Mohan's is attributed to that? Would you,
That people
Yeah,
are,
yes, yeah.
that the rents are rising in White Center.
that's creating homelessness?
Yeah.
In Seattle.
In Seattle.
Oh, yeah. I would say both. I mean, so overall, what we know is that when rents go, this is a sort of national study, when rents go up by $100 in a community, homelessness rates go up about 15% if that's an urban area, or 39% if it's suburban or rural areas. I think White Center would be considered urban by that measure. And so we definitely, when rents go up, it's not the only cause of homelessness, obviously, but it is a driver that keeps it, puts it just out of reach for more and more people.
Can you talk a little bit about, some of the notions that people move places to become homeless?
Yeah, I think, what we've found in sort of my years of doing this and talking to people from around the country is almost every city in the country feels like people are moving there from somewhere else for their services. That's just sort of a national thing. Like one of my colleagues does work around the West Coast, and she was in Hawaii, and literally like the governor there is convinced that people on the West Coast in Washington and Oregon are giving homeless people plane tickets to go to Hawaii. And they get stuck there. So there's definitely that kind of overall perception. The best data that we have, and it's on that map, or that infographic actually, it says that 97% of people said their last known zip code was somewhere in Washington State, and 87% said it was somewhere else, somewhere in King County. So these are, there are people moving for all sorts of reasons. People have always moved to Seattle and to the West Coast for jobs and for the economy. It's pretty hard to get across the country if you're homeless and have no money. So we don't think we see a whole lot of that.
And one of the things that we hear from a lot of different communities about issues of homelessness and any other number of things. And, I had a very interesting conversation with Kent Police Department not too long ago where they said, they had, folks who needed treatment or shelter, and what they were doing is they were driving them into Seattle. And then they would see them right back again. And they said the reason they would see them back again is because they had ties to the community. They didn't want to be in Seattle. They were there because they had a sibling who lived in the area, they had a child who lived in the area. And so one of the things that, any of you who got a copy of the letter I sent out to the community saw is that most people are who are homeless in a community have some tie to that particular community, whether it's the last place that they resided, or there's a friend or relative in the area. So it is, kind of an urban myth that people move places to become homeless, whether it was Mark saying that people are moving to Hawaii or moving elsewhere.
Adrian, but we've been hearing about sweeps of homeless people in Seattle. And I think we're concerned that many of the homeless people there, especially staying in the Myers Way area, or around West Crest Park, or north of Roxbury, have been swept from other places. We had a NUAC meeting last week or week before, and our deputy, our storefront deputy, reported that he doesn't think there are more than 25, I think he said.
I think it was 12 to 24.
Yeah, less than 2
People
dozen.
living on our streets and actually in White Center. So I think that's a concern.
Yeah, I think that, we will have another one-night count in January, and the count is, done by volunteers, and so there's not a conspiracy to find people where they are not. And actually, Steve Dashnell and I did a count 2 years ago together, and we found no one in the area that we were in. And so we had zeros on what we did. And so we do have documentation of whatever the number is, 89 or whatever that number is in White Center from last January. And we have people identifying living in White Center as well. So, I think that we should probably go with what the data say versus anecdotes. We certainly have heard plenty of complaints or comments over the time, whether it's from UI or others, about people who are homeless in the area and seeking solutions. So people are here, and people who are homeless are citizens, just like all of you are citizens, and our role here tonight is to try to figure out how we try to make sure that many citizens' needs are accommodated, both people who live in housing in the area and people who are living outdoors in the area. And so that's what we're hoping to try to do.
Question, Mark, were you able to answer that?
Yeah, so the 6,000 is a number of people who called for homelessness or housing services. It is not a deduplicated number, so people may call multiple times, and again, as you point out, it's tracked by zip codes, and those zip codes are bigger than just this specific area, and certainly the population is larger than that number.
So is there a number for the general, because I know you can be housed and need assistance with energy or bills or something?
So, I'm sorry, I don't think
Yeah, I would
understand
think there would
your
be a
Oh,
greater.
what's the
number.
bigger number? All calls from that? I don't have that number.
I mean, basically, people in homes can call.
Yeah, so I can get that, I can't get that right
Very commonly given out.
off here, but I can figure, we can get for the next meeting, the total number of 211 calls in the same area.
And as long as you're getting that data, I would love to know how many of those calls are people seeking access to food. Since they're
Okay,
on the site
all right.
already.
We have that information, so we can get that.
Because I know it's a lot.
Okay.
Any other questions about the data?
Well, and the one that counted, so I participated in the one that counted White Center for a number of years, and that number, the number counted in White Center is people who are sleeping on a doorstep, but it's also kind of people in cars.
Yes.
So that might change the way we see homelessness. I mean, people in cars are less visible, but less homeless, I guess would be fair to say.
Right.
We want to participate in the one that is coming January. Sure.
Yeah, get in touch with us. We're just starting to gear up with that with the Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness. So I don't know if my
That's all.
information. Yeah, I can give you my card.
And was there any numbers for the woods in Myers Way above 509 and on Myers Way? I mean, we have the RVs, we have Camp Second Chance, and then we have down in the woods, which is quite scary.
Yeah, as
I don't
we're,
believe anyone would go down there. but-
and maybe you can be helpful in helping us figure out, giving us a sense of where you're seeing people, because
Right.
then we want to make sure we're counting.
This is the
those
problem,
areas.
is you can't, they're kind of.
I've actually
it's in a
done
terrace.
that count
Yeah,
for about
that's-
5 years
That's the
running
same area?
in that area. It's averaging about 20 to 30 people each year. on the
Okay,
one night
and you're
count.
talking that little point
The
that comes
point
out.
from the beginning of the off-ramp to the end of the woods, basically.
Okay.
And
Because
it's
now
quite a
the police can't
sophisticated
go in
area.
without escorts, and it's gotten
Yeah,
really
we've had
dangerous
sheriff
in the
with
last
us when we've
3
done
months.
that.
Yeah. It's too bad.
I know, do you mind if I ask a question here? Just clarification on the data. The 69 are actual people that you counted within the border of White Center. It's not an average of the zip codes and then divided
This one
into
was
this area?
89, and this was in 2015.
Okay.
That were in the border of White Center,
So it was within the line that I'm seeing right here.
as far as I know.
Okay, just curious, because there's different ways of working the data.
And I know the opioid thing has kind of leveled off, but before that, it may not have yet. So in other words, there was a peak after that, and then, who knows, it feels like it's.
Yeah, I mean, the opioid crisis is a contributor to homelessness, but not the biggest one. Rents are actually the
I
biggest
think
one.
in this area though, on that street, it really is, in that area, it really is. It's like, the floodgates have been opened, let's put it that way. We're on the front lines of that, yeah.
Yeah.
So. And mental illness, which I think it all is.
All right, well, so then, the next on the agenda, and we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but we're going to tackle just a little bit about the shelter objectives, so then we can then move into the discussion about community concerns and comments, and also about alternative sites. But, as Adrian commented, one of our goals, obviously, is to make sure that we're meeting the needs for people who are experiencing homelessness, and that's both the community that's having an experience, and the impact of homelessness, and also those folks who are unhoused. And so, as we talked about, and Mark mentioned as well, when we look at the need and the shelter services that we have available. There are not a lot of shelter services in this general area, and as Mark pointed out, the southwest part of King County is the largest area outside of Seattle, and we see the need for services for people, the greatest number of people who are homeless. And so when we look to try to provide the services to those people who are experiencing it, this is an area that we really kind of seen a demand. And I think actually one of the things that we noticed, and Celia, I think you shared this sort of in the community survey, concerns about homelessness, I think was the number 2 highlighted concern in the White Center community survey as well. So when we look at the attempting to provide shelter services in this community, it really is an opportunity for bringing people indoors and getting them connected to housing, so that we really are addressing the community concerns around people living in greenbelts, people living downtown, and we're able to meet those service needs in this specific area. So as we talked about last time, we really are focusing on people who are experiencing homelessness in White Center. Through outreach, we really feel like we're going to be able to bring those, whether it's 89 or 25 or whatever the number of people is, we're really going to be able to bring those folks in, get them connected to services, and really operate this enhanced shelter model that really is connecting those folks directly to services and then directly to housing, so that we're able to really move them into a permanent situation and not have them residing on the streets or in the green belts and making it so we have issues in the park with the folks playing frisbee golf or whatever it is. So that's really the goal of the shelter as we look to White Center, really is how do we meet the needs of the people experiencing homelessness in White Center now. And I think we feel with the enhanced shelter model and sort of the expanded outreach that we're going to be able to do with folks, and the hours and the extended hours, that we're going to be able to address those kind of needs directly. So that's, when we look at the shelter objectives, it really is the White Center issue around homelessness and addressing that both for the community and for the folks who are homeless in this community. And so I think there are a number of you have questions. There were a whole lot of comments and questions at the community meeting a few weeks ago that we can talk about. And so I think from both Mark's comments on homelessness in general, the idea of the shelter and the concept, I think we really kind of want to open this up for the discussion, questions, concerns, and also not want to lose the time, kind of a portion for the alternative site discussion. Because one of the things we certainly heard in the meeting on the 15th was, not this location, is there another location? We want to support the homeless, but this isn't the right spot. So we're certainly interested in hearing from all of you, as many of you are residents here, what are some alternative locations where we feel like that's a viable alternative, and then we can go out and try to understand where those are, what those opportunities look like. So I think that's kind of what we want to have as the bulk of this discussion. So I'll leave it at that. I don't know, Adrian, if you have anything that you add to that.
Yeah, no, I would say as we go into the next part of the discussion, we outlined, Mark outlined some of the concepts for the shelter at the community meeting, and and some of the things that we heard from from many people were size. People were concerned about size, and so it's those types of programmatic things that we want to hear more about, folks' concerns and specific concerns about those issues, because some of those things are things that we could potentially address or change or figure out what the root of that concern is and do something different about it. So although Mark, I guess what I'm trying to say is, although Mark outlined some very specific programmatic elements, that was the draft proposal, and there are items there that are changeable, and that's where I want to get to the heart of people's questions and concerns.
So Rick,
yes, I respectfully request to go first because I do absolutely need to leave in 15 minutes. Again, let me introduce myself. My name is Rick Jump. I'm the Executive Director of the White Center Food Bank. The mission of the White Center Food Bank is to minimize hunger, nourish community, and embrace our rich cultural diversity. While we serve homeless people, that is not part of our mission. We are by design a low barrier food bank, and we do provide services to a lot of homeless families. My concerns that I would like to bring to the table is issues around transparency and open communication, and I would like information on what the impacts will be to the day-to-day operation of the White Center Food Bank, because the proposed site is located immediately next door to the White Center Food Bank. We currently serve about 1,800 families per month. We have a baby pantry that's open 3 afternoons a week where we serve about 1,000 children per month. Many of them are playing in the garden area there, which is part of the proposed site. So those are our concerns or issues that we would like addressed.
I guess similarly, just as another occupant of the public health building, we have similar concerns around our ongoing staffing and, you know, how, whether folks will be sort of ringing our doorbell looking for information.
And in terms of the open communication and transparency, it's particularly important for us to know what is happening and when it is happening.
Sure. Okay, other comments, questions?
And I think we talked about this at the meeting, but if you could sort of review what the enhanced thing means.
Sure.
And also, I'd be interested to know, are there other models like what you're proposing, other places in the county, just, so here's an example of what it actually looks like when it's up to ground.
Sure. So the one of the things that we've learned, I think we mentioned this at the meeting, is that, you know, historically the county has operated primarily emergency shelters. So these are shelters that open up at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, close at 6 o'clock in the morning. They're places for people to sort of seek you know, a safe, warm place to sleep at night. But they are not designed really to connect people with services, to really work to address any of the sort of pre-existing conditions that may sort of be precipitating their homeless condition. And so I think while we do a good job of keeping people safe in the evenings, it doesn't lead to sort of a housing solution. So when we look at an enhanced shelter, what I think we're trying to move to is really a place where this is a first opportunity, or one of the first opportunities where we get people to come indoors and we really can begin to engage with them. If we're going to do that, we need to operate those shelters for a longer period of time, because when somebody comes in wet and cold at 8 o'clock at night, all they really want to do is lay down and go to sleep. And then if we're waking them up at 5:30 in the morning and telling them that they need to leave, there really is no opportunity to engage with those folks in any meaningful way as far as providing services, trying to understand root causes, any of that. So we know that we need to extend our hours so that we can have that engagement. I think similarly, we also know that if we're going to bring people in earlier, we need to be providing meals. That goes a long way in settling people down, moving them into a place where they actually are able to have a conversation with the case manager, because they're fed, they're feeling comfortable, they're able to have a productive discussion. And the other piece of that is exactly the case management piece. So what are the services that we're able to either bring into the specific location or connect people with externally, so that they can begin to address whether it's a substance use issue, it's a mental health problem, maybe it's simply an employment connection that people need to go and have an opportunity to meet with somebody and get connected with employment services. And for a number of these people, they are employed already. And so they're actually just literally trying to find a place where they can lay their head at night. So I think for all of those sorts of things, there is a variety of service needs. And what we recognize is we need extended hours and extended services to those folks to try to address those kind of objectives. I think, you know, Owen, to your second question, where else have we done this? We have shelters that provide different levels of services. We've added what we would call sort of housing navigation services to our shelters downtown, and had some level of success in getting folks moved into shelter there. Now that's, even in that environment where we don't have really much longer hours, we've been able to connect some number of those folks directly with housing services and get them in. Similarly, a lot of those people are, you know, are employed and simply trying to find a place to rest. And so I think what we found is that they have an opportunity to connect with the services, we can get them into housing. I think there are other shelters kind of throughout the county. We don't necessarily fund all of the shelters that provide sort of a disparate level of services. And to say this is really a new model, not exclusively in King County, that it hasn't been tried before, but this is a new model where we're trying to move our funding because we have recognized a shortage, in the shortfall in how we have provided services and this first sort of touch with folks to get them housed.
So conceivably, I could show up at the shelter, get a meal, meet somebody who then that next day could connect me to some other services where I could, that's a lot more process than just gonna, here's a bed.
Right. Yeah, that is the goal. That you know, and one of the other things that we've done is I have over the last few months started a coordinated entry system. So everybody who is homeless in the county, we're working through this. As Mark pointed out, we have over 10,000 people who experience this homeless in 1 year. We or at any one time. We are assessing everybody for their needs. We have a common assessment tool that really starts to identify what sort of housing intervention somebody needs. If they, if they score really high on that assessment tool, that sort of points them to sort of permanent supportive housing, a housing environment where really it's going to deal with sort of mental illness and a co-occurring substance use issue. Whereas if somebody's assessment is in sort of a kind of a lower level, they may simply need a light touch in services and be able to be directed to housing and get connected in that way. So that is all part of how we do kind of that assessment piece you're talking about, and then get those folks connected with the services, housing counselor or navigator, kind of right, ideally the next day. Whether we're going to be able to ultimately do that in all shelters and all locations, I think is a challenge. But when we talk about the White Center piece, we certainly, and how this shelter will operate, we want to be able to connect those people who are there and have an expectation around outcomes as well, that if you're going to come into that shelter, our provider is really going to have we're going to have an expectation of that provider that they're going to get to connect to services into housing in a short period of time. And we would hold them accountable for that.
What is the short period of time?
Yeah, so the national best practice is 30 days, that you basically, someone presents at shelter, you're able to address their, get them connected to services, address their underlying cause, and move them into housing. So that's the national best practice, and we would certainly have an expectation that they be moving in that direction. I think, will everybody who shows up be able to be housed in 30 days? Unlikely, but that's kind of the national best practice around that.
So that sounds to me like you're saying once you get 100 people who have shown up at this shelter, they're guaranteed at least 30 nights of bed?
No, I don't think we're saying that.
So
I
then
think.
how?
So that two
Yeah.
points of clarification. First is the number. So what Mark had talked about before at the meeting was up to 70, and the reason that they talked up to 70 because that's what it looked like the building could accommodate, and so that number is not firm. And I think Mark tried to explain at the meeting as well that even if that were the top target, it would take a while to get there. When we talk about the 30-day goal, it's having housing navigators and other folks providing services trying to connect people with those services with the goal that they would be able to move out within 30 days. And so some people, if they have all the right things in place, and so it may be somebody who is currently working, because what we found is a lot of people who are homeless actually are working. It may be introducing them to somebody else so they find a roommate, and also helping them with first and last month's rent so that they can get into housing. So that could be 2 people right away, 2 weeks out. Other people may have a lot more barriers than that, and so they may take longer to help get out into a more stable situation. But the overall goal is on average to try to help people get out of shelter in 30 days. And one of the reasons for that is because the national studies show that people have much better outcomes. The longer the people stay homeless, the longer the people stay in shelter, the harder it is to re-engage and get their life back on track.
I guess what my question was geared to was, I think much of the concern is that you talked about it being a regional shelter, and if different people are coming every night from a different area, that causes, it doesn't seem like it leads to success.
And that's not the intent, and Liz, that's great that you brought that up, that you brought that up. And so that is a concern where we probably did not provide enough clarity on that issue. And so the idea really is to work within the White Center community. Mark has talked to Sound Mental Health and other folks to try to get a sense of who's here, who's living here, what does Sound Mental Health think that people's issues are. They've done a lot of outreach in White Center, and so to work with Sound Mental Health and the Salvation Army to do direct outreach to people who are in some of the doorways in White Center, the people we see, and convince them to come inside and work specifically with those people. I mean, the intent is not to pull people from areas. I think the clarity that Mark was trying to provide is, you know, if there are 2 people in the shelter from White Center, it wouldn't be that we would say nobody, you know, on a cold, rainy night else could come in. But we would have to have a system, and those people are going to have to be connected. And so it's not intended that people come in for one night and leave. It really is intended to be a much more structured program than that.
Because I have to leave, may I ask one final question? Is anything happening on November 1st?
Not with regards to the shelter. I'm sure there's plenty of things happening to the shelter. Not with regards to the shelter. No, and you know, so yes, so there needs to be a lot more opportunity for dialogue and conversation with the community. We need the opportunity if folks raise, you know, alternative sites to look at alternative sites, and so we've got more work to be done.
Has that been communicated to anyone other than the people in the room?
Not that specific date. So we will do. I mean, we're anticipating that will. Yeah. So we will get that information.
That and then also, you know, all of the not communicating before makes me a little bit concerned about the sustainability of the homeless shelter. Because all sustainability practices would say that it's really important that the number one thing is that the community are part of it, and I feel like this is a step, but then just maybe really understanding that it's, I don't, you know, there's probably a lot of people who are still very concerned, and parents who come into my classroom, their children walk, who are still very concerned, and that would really be a nice thing to kind of relieve a lot of people, and to say that we're working towards this kind of change.
I just want to also add, though, that the longer we go into winter, the longer it is that people are outside. So I just want to, I know that, you know, there's concerns and they need to be addressed, but that much more people are outside.
And I don't think anyone in this room doesn't want everyone to have a roof over their head, some kind of safe place to spend the night. But looking at these numbers and looking at the fact that, you know, I've lived in this community long enough to know, and I'm around, I walk a lot in the community, I'm downtown White Center a lot walking, and I've seen over the years many of the same homeless people, but in the last few years I've seen many new homeless that have come into the community, and a lot of that started when they had the Nicholsville camp that was in Highland Park. And now with the folks on Myers Way. And, you know, one of my concerns is that as people lose all their housing in the city of Seattle, they're being pushed down this way. And that's increasing our homeless population. We have a lot of green space. We have a lot of empty storefronts, places where people can spend the night. And looking at the numbers that there are 8 beds in all of West Seattle, with a population there of over, I think it's over 80,000 people in that community. And so White Center now is being targeted as the place where we have to shelter these folks. And that is a little concerning to me.
And Barbara, we'll have to clarify that. I don't think that there's only 8 beds in all of West Seattle. That I believe that those were the closest ones to White Center.
Okay.
I have a question. Were you planning on patterning? I was at the Barbara Kopey, you know, the June 8th city council meeting. So, you know, it's a big PowerPoint presentation that they put on. So I'm wondering if you're patterning these shelters after the ones that seem to be working, like in San Francisco and different sister cities that they toured, and I'm sure we paid a lot of money to get that information. So I feel a little frustrated that it feels like that's not happening fast enough. The 24/7, low barrier navigation style, you know, different ones in different cities, but that's the basic plan, and I feel like it's frustrating to not see that happen fast enough. And I don't know if that's the plan, the goal, but I don't think just part-time shelters seem to be working no matter where they're at. So, I mean, they help, I'm sure they help, but you know,
Right.
they're not the thing that helps, especially for addicted people and for people that, need the other services too.
It also would be good to know how many beds there are in West Seattle, how many shelter
Yeah.
beds are available.
I could just, if you want, I can change to that. Like the shelter, that Mark talked about, the really countywide, we're trying to transform the shelter system to meet those recommendations.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
gonna take some time because it's more expensive.
Yeah.
But this shelter has aspects of that recommendation as well as some other things that I think the county's trying to do in other parts of the county. And then the city is close to selecting sort of the site and the operator for its first program as well.
Seems like they're working. I think it's 4 out of 5 in San Francisco. Depends on the, which one you're talking about, but it doesn't seem good to push everyone over to the Tenderloin, which is what they've done for a
Yeah,
while.
they're opening more of them.
Right, but that's sort of what this feels like, so.
Yeah.
I guess we're the Tenderloin,
I guess, I'm sorry, I stopped talking, but there are 3,800 other shelter beds in King County.
Yeah.
So, and most of them are in downtown Seattle, so.
Okay.
Roslyn, you had a question?
Yes, I do. I have lots of questions.
Yeah.
So, out of the numbers that you've counted, how many of those are the exact target that you're trying to house at the shelter?
I mean, I think the shelter really is open to anybody who's experiencing homelessness. So whether they're chronically homeless or, episodically homeless, the shelter would be open to, as we said, it's targeted to the folks in White Center, but it would be the people who are living here. So I think you've got people who are any amount of that on any continuum. Episodically, you just need to get connected to half of it.
I think I meant more so the age range because you are targeting specifically adults over 18. Families are not allowed, children are not allowed, which was very confusing because it's in an area filled with children everywhere, but yet they wouldn't be allowed in that facility. That is extremely disheartening. Gentleman down there who said he just did the White Knight count down in that area, which would probably be one of the areas where you'd like people to come from. He needs a sheriff to go down there. Those people are armed, and to bring them into this very residential area where kids are walking to school as young as 5, 6 years old. I see them every day. I'm walking to and from the bus as a single woman, already getting phone sex, walking down the street. It's terrifying to think that you would be bringing those people into such a residential area. My question is, how many of those people that you counted in the White Center area are 18 plus males, most likely, and couples, I think you said, that would be housed in this area in that shelter?
Yeah, so I think when we do the one night count, it's very early in the morning, and so I don't think, it doesn't identify whether they're youth, their families, or adult, male, female, so I think that 89 isn't differentiated in that way. And so I don't think there's a way of necessarily connecting however many people were counted there with exactly who would be coming into this shelter. But to your point, I think, we talked about it being adults in couples who would be targeted to use that to occupy the White Center shelter.
And why specifically that target audience?
Because I think when we look at both anecdotally in the calls and just generally, the shelter need is greatest for single adults.
In specifically in White Center?
In White Center and throughout the county.
Okay, so are you opening any similar shelters throughout the county in places like Ravenna, Roosevelt, Greenwood?
We are, and specifically two other shelters that we're looking to open on county property are one Bellevue.
Which is, I looked at the location, it's behind a college, not a residential area at all, next to a few businesses. So how did you choose that location?
It's county properties. And so that would be 100% adult male shelter. We're also looking at in Kenmore right now, at another county property up in Kenmore, and examining whether that.
And what is that, what kind of area surrounds that shelter?
It's about 2 blocks from the downtown in Kenmore. It's one of our sheriff facilities.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And county owned
So we have
facility.
about 250
Are those low
shelter
barrier?
beds scattered in churches in Ballard and Finney and Greenwood
And are those
Industry.
all low barrier, 18 plus, no searches, no checks, without any kind of security on the staff.
I'm not sure the specifics, there wouldn't be security.
Shelters don't have security. I mean, most of the majority of shelters in the shelter system are in churches, and so in residential neighborhoods.
Are those all low barrier shelters?
It,
They're in
it,
churches?
it ranges, yeah.
I think that's more of a new thing and it may need to be.
Which, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Those people need help as well.
Yeah.
I have family members who are drug addicts, so I mean, I have struggled with that addiction. And so I totally understand that, and I would want them to be housed. However, I definitely wouldn't necessarily think that inside of a residential area around children would be the best place for them or anyone else.
And so, and I think what I'm hearing you say is you're primarily concerned about safety. And
Yes,
safety of
100%.
children.
100%.
Where are the folks, I think during the day, people have an issue about where are folks supposed to go that aren't working? And if you, especially, if folks that are coming in aren't actually in White Center to begin with. So we're bringing more homeless to the community. It's already burdened, and we're, on a stormy, rainy day, where are people supposed to go? What are the thoughts on that?
So, the thoughts on that one are not that the doors open and people just leave. So the plan was either that people are transported to, so we, Salvation Army figures out what are the range of needs that people have. So people are transported, and so if employment is a primary need, Salvation Army has bus transportation. People might be taken down to WorkSource Renton. It's a big one-stop for employment. So go there, work with them, so that we would work on their housing needs. Other people may be transported to other areas of services. It might be a public health clinic. I mean, a lot of people have health needs. It could be, going to Navos or some of the other places where their treatment offering. And so the concept really was for Salvation Army to figure out what a schedule would be based on the needs of the people in there. The alternative to that is that the shelter could be 24/7, and so that people wouldn't be leaving either. I mean, that's, I'm sorry, I don't know the woman's name, Carol. Carol had mentioned the recommendations out of the reports that have recently been done in the community are highly recommending that shelters are 24/7, based on the fact that people need a place for their belongings to be, that it's disruptive to have to leave, as you've indicated. So the intent was never just to open the doors and say, okay, just go ahead and wander around. We totally understand those concerns, and that's not the intent.
Could you clarify, we've thrown around the word low barrier a lot. I think
Right.
some of us that means scary things and others of it aren't.
Right.
Can you use a picture of what that
Yeah,
actually
I think
means?
so. I think that's a really excellent point. So let me tell you what we're not talking about. So what we are not talking about is what Carol mentioned, which is something that the city of Seattle is thinking about, which is called the Navigation Center, which is truly a low barrier. People could potentially use, or things like that. I mean, it's to take people as they are.
Come as you are. Or something.
Yeah, it's come as you are. That is not what the intent is. That is not what the intent is here. There is a place for those type of shelters. They're very important, and in fact, San Francisco is finding a very high level of success there, but that's not what we were talking about. When we mention low barrier here, what we're saying is that if somebody shows up and they have alcohol in their breath, they're not going to be turned away, or we're not going to require that people are sober or don't have a mental health issue or that they are employed. There are some shelters that require that people participate in prayers, in order to be, and that's a barrier. The requirements that people, may have some type of sobriety test, that is a barrier. So the intent really is to, be someplace in the middle between having lots of barriers that, you need to be like the one, front page of the magazine, homeless family that has just had a medical emergency, and but for that, you know, you wouldn't be homeless, versus folks who have a substantial amount of needs and barriers and may be addicted and may be needing to shoot up every 2 hours to stay alive. That's not the intent here. So
how would you make sure that wasn't happening? Who's checking this?
Right.
And who's making sure that people aren't bringing weapons?
Yeah, so there's, I mean, obviously we have the shelter operator in this case is the Salvation Army. There is a process, they have 3 people at a time that it's checked in, and you know, if we set up the rules around the shelter as kind of been laid out, all of those can be checked at the time when people come. And the shelter operators do turn people away. I've been in shelters in Bellevue, I've been in shelters in other places where either because of past behavior or because of, you know, any of these sorts of things that you're pointing out, that, you know, they're not allowed to come in. They may find a different shelter for them to go to. There's a network that basically works to connect people with other shelter beds kind of throughout the county each evening where there is excess capacity, but because of, you know, whether it's a past rule violation or they aren't meeting the criteria that are set up at that specific shelter, those people are not allowed in. The reason why you end up having 3 people at the time of check-in is really to manage that whole process. They need sort of that level of staffing at that time to sort of make sure that the people who are coming in are adhering to the rules, are, you know, not actively using it as they enter any of those kinds of things. So
would they be doing pat-downs or making sure, checking their bags or anything like that?
I think I'm not sure that different operators do it differently. With the ones that I've seen, they don't actively go through people's bags or pat people down for weapons. So I think that's a question that we would need to sort out with this operator or whoever we ultimately selected, any of the ones that we work with. So I think that's as much.
And then if they are turned away, are they transported somewhere else, or do you just turn them away and ask them to find a bus there, because the 2 bus stops that right there go straight up to Admiral, and they go to South Center and to Columbia City. They don't go downtown. So just curious how that would work.
So I think one of the things that we would have to figure out with the Salvation Army is, I mean, we can't have people lining up there. I mean, so some of the downtown shelters people line up for, and so there would have to be a different way of doing it. And there are shelters in other places where people, if people were to loiter in an area, then you're banned from the shelter. And so we would need to have a way to manage the area so people are not loitering. And so I don't know what the answer to that is. There would have to be an organized referral system as well, because I mean, people are not going to just you know, be able to show up here. I mean, so we will have to manage, though, if we are going to be specifically referring people, who those people are, why they're being referred to the shelter, and what the plan is for those individuals.
I just have to say one more thing.
Sure.
It's a little disheartening that you're trying to figure all this stuff out, and yet you're planning to open the shelter November 1st. So I'm glad you're not, because clearly you have some things to work out. But just letting you know that's very disheartening to think that you would have done that.
So there's no way that this can be a women shelter, right? Because of the data shows that single men that we need to house.
Well, there's couples, right?
Couples and single adults.
So it's not just men.
Yeah, I know couples, but I mean, so we can't like take the men somewhere else and just throw the families. I know this is ignorance, but you know, I mean, that's part of the thing, because it's a residential area. That's why it keeps coming up. Can we be a family shelter? So, so I'm just asking one more time. It can't be, because you're going based on data.
But, and the assumption in that statement is that families are less of a threat than men, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not trying to make a judgment of anybody. It's just, you know, it's a residential area. So, so I'm just trying to really, you know, turn over ask all the questions and making sure that everything that I've heard, everything that's been asked to me, we kind of ask the question. So it's just just trying to find out.
I think that would make sense. We have a lot of homeless families at Mountain View,
Yeah.
and we could
Yeah.
probably fill the homeless shelter with just families, and it's right in the middle of the school, so I think that would make sense.
Support that also.
It makes a lot more sense to me as well.
And one more thing about the woods, that is actually Seattle, so if there were 20 people, which I believe there are more now, it seems like that should be a shelter that Seattle or Soto or, yeah, the Myers, it's basically, we live this side of the border and the crime just keeps coming, you know, basically since Camp Second Chance showed up, it's like a beacon for everyone. And part of it is press and there's a lot of things happening, but it's really changed in the last year. But the woods are not White Center, and neither, basically none of the homeless on Myers Way are anything to do with unincorporated King County or White Center.
Right.
So it's sort of like we are saturated. We have a burden on every level. You know,
And that, you know, although that issue has come up, I mean, we are acutely aware that that is
Yeah,
not
just
White Center.
reminding
And
you.
so when we talk about the numbers in White Center, they don't include the folks
Okay.
in those
Seemed like that
areas.
was getting lumped in,
Yeah.
but yeah, okay. Sorry. Thank you.
Where do you find, as far as housing, and it might be difficult to answer, but, you know, when you do find housing for folks, is that throughout the county? Is there a specific area that you're finding where you can house people more readily, or?
Yeah, so I think it is throughout King County. It really depends on ultimately what needs that person has. So if they, need a permanent supportive housing building, those are typically operated by a handful of nonprofits throughout the county, and so those are, we would target those people to kind of live in those places. A lot of folks who either just don't earn enough money because of the job they have, or are temporarily unemployed, and we're able to deal with that unemployment. What we can end up doing is actually housing them in just typical market rate buildings through what's called rapid rehousing, so it's basically rent assistance. And what we find actually is by getting those folks into housing, even if they're paying a lot, 50–60% of their income towards that housing, they do whatever they can to retain that housing. So there isn't necessarily one kind of housing that folks get to. And one of the other things, and so if people were involved, listening to the Bar Poppy discussion, one of the other sort of recommendations was really sort of challenging our notion of what housing can and should be for folks, right? So we do a great job of putting people into affordable housing in this community and homeless housing. A lot of it is really quite nice. I think we have a depth of a homeless problem where we need to be willing to accept that two people who are homeless might room together in a single apartment, or we might need to connect them with a family and have them double up with their family or their residents. So I think that is also sort of challenging our own notion as a community about how we approach housing and what we're willing to accept, and how we really need to find broader solutions than what we have done historically in this community. So I think we know what it historically has been, we know where we are right now, some sort of combination of chronic, the permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing and sort of self-resolving, and then needing to move to a place where we really are even seeking more broadly solutions of doubling up and that sort of thing.
So specifically, there's a program, and the name is changing, called Landlord Liaison Program, where it's a program where, through contract with the county, that we have folks who actively work with landlords to identify apartments for people. So it is throughout the county. Obviously, places where that is more affordable, it's more likely to find housing. So that's going to be the northern part of the county, certain pockets on the east side, South King County, and now Pierce County as well.
But they need change funding for next year.
Pardon me?
They need funding for next year.
They're
in an RFP process.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Yeah. We're in an RFP process right now.
I really do think that you should look at what you just said, that the affordable housing is in the north and the south, because that's really contributing to many of our ongoing issues here. NUAC has for quite some time been looking at the concentration of poverty here, and it's undeniable. And I think that by using the words affordable housing, you aren't quite being honest, because you really do mean low-income housing. And so to step.
Actually, that, you know, affordability has a range. And so just to be specific, I mean, you know, affordable housing can be anything up to somebody earning 80% of area median income. And Mark, you probably know that number better.
Well, for a
better
single
than
person,
me.
it's about $45,000.
Yeah.
For a family of four, it goes up to, you know, $75,000, $80,000 for the county.
And does that change with property values? Like-
No, it's an income calculation, not a property value calculation.
And so, you know, so the county funds a range of housing, King County Housing Authority funds a range of housing, and actually the city of Seattle funds more affordable housing than pretty much any place else in the nation. And so there are a lot of affordable housing opportunities at that range within the city of Seattle. And so when people are in Seattle, you know, the folks who are working on landlord liaison and other things are trying to help people stay within the community that they are. I mean, client choice is something that we try very hard to meet, because people are most successful when they're connected to the community that they are from.
I have one thing on that. People with opioid addiction, sometimes it's better to remove them from their area. So I feel like that's a newish thing, even though it's not that new, but, you know, you take the Vietnam experiment or the rat park experiment, and it's just undeniable. I mean, I know someone whose brother went to a chicken farm in Virginia for 8 years, or, you know, and stories like that. And that's a little bit weird, because I know Lisa Herbold said something about, well, we can't just, you know, make people go there, but what if they want to or need to?
Yeah, and that's
should
why
be
it's
part of the
important to have
equation.
client.
Yeah.
That's why it's important to have
Can they
client
be
choice.
asked, and, you know, is there a better price that you wouldn't be so tempted or triggered?
But getting back to Liz's point, I think there's more on
Yeah.
that as far as when you talk about affordable housing, and that we're talking about more poverty in this community, housing for people in poverty. So we are concentrating poverty here, as opposed to, you know, there is a difference between a family of four at 70,000 and a family of four at 20,000. And what the needs are, and what impact does that have on the schools and the tax base and the community as a whole.
Sure. And Marty, I want to make sure we talk about the shelter here. I mean, I know that there's important issues to talk about, but we really want to talk about the shelter and the, you know, and focus on that rather than having a broader discussion about affordable housing. And so, you know, I think we've heard a number of things, and I want to make sure that we're surfacing all the concerns that people have. And so, you know, people have concerns about safety in general. Folks have asked us to look at the need for homeless families in the area. People have asked how people would be sent to this particular shelter. People have asked that we make sure that it is 24 or enhanced shelter, to ensure that we have a new model, that we are helping people get out of homelessness. People have asked about how they're screening for weapons. What else have I missed? What are some of the other?
I have one other comment.
Absolutely.
Can you please make sure that the building will be safe for whoever winds up residing there?
Mhm.
There has been very little interaction as far as fire safety. And I think that's very important, particularly if it becomes a family shelter, which I think would be great.
To that point, I think it feels like a very big conflict of interest because you are in charge of permitting.
Well,
And
our
yet,
department is not.
well, but King County is in charge of permitting, so there's no third party viewing the building to make sure it actually is safe. Because you can say it's safe all you want, but if King County is in charge of permitting, no one can say otherwise, right?
Well, no, there are national codes that people need to look at, and so they need to make sure it meets fire code. And actually, the North Highline Fire District is the response, and so, you know, obviously there's going to be conversations with the North Highline.
Yeah, he actually came to our meeting and he pointed out a long laundry list of things that are wrong with that building.
Sure. I mean, so that's one of the reasons why you know, we are having conversation, we're going through the permitting process. And then not just opening up.
So who holds you accountable then the permitting office to actually going through the permitting process correctly?
The county has a permitting department, there's a fire marshal, so there is a code process.
I just wanted to add some comments. I want to say thank you for this opportunity and I reached out to Celia. And I want to echo what Bob, right, from the thing? Rick. What Rick had said, and you know, transparency is pretty important. I mean, this meeting should have happened a long time ago, and I think there would have been a much different response. So that's important. It's really for this team, specifically that location and these parameters for this shelter. I like the ideas that I've heard, and I'm not an expert, but I would say that to offer some suggestions would be along those same lines. One, large building with different departments there to help those who need, whether it's mental health, addiction, employment, food, bed, and there are many nonprofits. I feel that that's also, you know, important to bring them and be involved, or even for-profit businesses, rather than county personnel, because sometimes we all know complicated things sometimes, just due to county limitations. So.
Last night I attended a meeting at West Seattle. It was WIN, and it was more of the emergency shelters, but they're quite prepared, a lot more than we are in this area for it, and so that might be a natural fit or retrofit, whatever, you know. And I got invited last minute to that, but I still have everything on my clipboard from that, so we can connect on that, you know, later. They may have ideas.
There's a definite need.
Yeah, on both.
We all know it. Homelessness has been around forever. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I think, you know, the idea of having, not enabling is I've been homeless. I have homeless friends. I know, you know, once you're out on the streets and you don't have something, that's the moment things get real. And you talk to any of them, you don't have to walk on eggshells. You know, they know it, so they should also, you know, be treated that way, not given so much. Because once you give somebody something, there's not that much motivation. And there are a lot of really unique, I mean, even especially on Myers Way, we talked about the little homes. That's a great program. That's a great area for it. But I think, like you mentioned, I don't think that is White Center.
No,
it's
there's no plumbing and no electricity and toxic fume dust, so it's not a great spot.
No.
And it's bringing more of the dangerous from into the woods across. It's a separate issue at the same street, and you can't see that problem below. So it's sort of giving the invite for everyone just to live everywhere around there.
I looked at that site for a disc golf course.
Yeah, I mean, it would be.
And I think it would be great to clean it up, but
yeah,
it's
there's a lot
honestly
of work.
scary. The woods are scary.
Yeah, we'd like to get them back.
I do have to bring up, I moved here about 3 years ago, Firehouse, and at that time there were 2 homes that are right next to the shelter area that were squatters were in them, and it was horrible. I really regretted moving here. I was scared to death to walk down the street, found drugs on the sidewalks, and they started clustering. And more RVs came, more people were staying in their RVs. So, I mean, I think when you talk to people from that vicinity, having lived through that for a number of months, and it was really difficult to get them out. You know, there wasn't really much the sheriffs could do. The man who lives directly behind the location, he called daily to get something to happen, and it didn't. He had to build another fence because people were, going to the bathroom right there and doing drugs. It was really terrible. Eventually, they moved out. The houses were flipped, sold. 3 new homes were just built right there. Another house that was vacant, and there were some squatters there as well. And now has wonderful people living in it. So it's really hard to think about going back to that place. And so I think you have to be sensitive to that because we did live through that experience. And I really think that it would start clustering the way that you're talking about. It's unnerving. So.
Yeah, it's hard to be understood on that. You
No,
get
it's-
granted as a hater, and you're
No,
like, no, we're not.
it's scary. I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't walk past those homes.
Yeah. We're just trying to keep it safe. We're the ones kind of first responding, so it's ridiculous that we should have to do that. Yeah. Exactly.
So, I think I want to collect other questions and concerns, and I also want to talk about 820. I also want to talk about the alternative sites that some people had suggested, make sure that we identify those, that we can begin to kind of look at what those might be. So before we switch to that, I want to make sure if there's anything else that people, as far as comments, questions, or concerns. Yeah.
Is there a reevaluation period where you check in? How's it going? Check in with the community members, check in with the teachers. If there's any issues with children, and my wife and 2-year-old daughter walk in the park every day. Does King County have any plans to check back in with the community, or is it like, see you in 3 years when we permit this place again?
The county, we are happy to provide that type of process. I mean, there have been, it's usually one at the community request, and a lot of, and this happens a lot whether we're working with an organization to site homeless housing or shelter, and so it's a frequent request, that we're happy to accommodate to have a group of community advisors come back to the community and check in to see how things are going.
I wonder if that kind of a thing could also broaden, instead of just focusing on the shelter, could address homelessness issues. If we gathered a group of citizens who were working to support each other, that could be a really cool way to expand.
As I wrote, because I wrote a Mark email, and I was saying, while I'm not prepared to say that I'm going to be negatively impacted by the shelter, I do think that there will be an impact in the community. And, my question was basically that if we find that, this is not working out with the schools and, we're having daily issues with children, if that turns out to be the case, which I'm not prepared to say that, I think that's going to happen, but if it turns out, do we contact you guys?
Yes.
Yeah, you do. And, we also are in, weekly contact with the Salvation Army, with our shelter operators. We get comments from, in other communities if people have concerns. We meet with shelter operators, we meet with, whether it be law enforcement or whoever, to try to address those concerns that that the community has about that shelter. So we routinely do that, and we have we will have obviously a contract with a whole lot of expectations, and so we manage to that, and we do that with the shelter provider. And this would only make that process work even better.
I think the idea of a group of folks looking not just at the shelter, but thinking about homelessness broadly in the community is a very good idea.
It would be good to establish some type of work group to come up with best practices for not only this shelter, but for shelters throughout the county. If there could be the attachment of funding to how those units are run. I know one of the concerns that I would offer from the school district is, again, being a former shelter operator for a number of years, is that, you have individuals who come in who have sexual offense in their history. And I know in a low barrier, you want to make sure that you can bring people in, give them services, and get treatment, help, etc. But that, I know that's a concern that's been floated previously. There are ways that you can run a shelter and have people coming in, but also make sure that the community is protected. And I think that those are some points that can be worked out. And there are best practices, either in the county, in the state, abroad, that can be brought to bear on that, and a number of the other concerns that we brought up. So trying to organize some type of work group around that would probably be a concern. And I don't offer anything that I don't want to put my name to, so I'm happy to try to say I'm willing to help work on something like that. Or to invite other shelter operators, so I know, so working in the Seattle area, the county area, to say, to come to a meeting like that and try to set this up, so.
I do have to say, the meeting, occasional meeting and check-ins and all that stuff sounds great, but generally in the past month or so, it's been really difficult to find out any information. Nobody knew that the shelter wasn't opening on November 1st. And prior to that, nobody even knew it was going to happen up until the middle of September when you live, 3 houses down. So it's really hard for me to believe that, honestly. So my suggested solution would be that you have more than one point of contact. I think it's important to bring other people on board as far as your direct contacts. I believe Celia, correct? Yeah. And I have been asked to have someone else potentially be that point of contact because there may be conflicts of interest. But I'm not entirely sure how that works, but I think it's really important that you're communicating with more than one person.
Sure. When we talk about communication, I think the original notice that only went out to people within 500 feet, someone really needs to talk deeper because that is not sufficient. It makes it look like you're hiding what you're doing, and that's scary. This community doesn't have much trust, and I'm part of that, I admit, from past experience. You really need to work on that, build up our trust level. I contacted Kevin LeClaire before, when I first heard about the meeting. I asked him under what ordinance or whatever you were doing this. I sent him a follow-up email a couple of weeks ago. I still do not have a response. That's problematic.
I think that also speaks to like the schools, contacting just the principal who is not from this community, does not live anywhere near this community. That's not really, it's a great one step, but like there needs to be more. And I think it also is the transparency and then the sustainability for community development projects. And I think, like for me personally, I think that's the biggest thing is I'm not sure how a homeless shelter can really run effectively in a community when everyone around them feels so negatively, and for those poor people that who are there, who have to deal with those negative emotions on, when they're just needing a little bit of help. I think that really concerns me.
And I'll follow up with that. We are, from what I've seen, from what I know of this community, what I like and enjoy about this community, we're resourceful, creative, and we're wanting to help people. And so you're absolutely right. The reality is a homeless shelter that is thought through with the full community. Everyone is involved. Everyone is notified in a reasonable time. Can be much more effective than one that is. I don't want to say it, but it feels like it was very sneaky, and that it just creates total mistrust. You're absolutely right. You're going to question everyone who goes in and out of it. You're not going to trust anyone, and it's a process. The process has to work for everyone in this community.
It would be interesting to know how that community education piece would work. I used to work at Seattle Pacific University, and 2 times our institution hosted Tent City 3, which is this encampment of people who are experiencing homelessness on our campus. And if you know SPU, it's predominantly female. So there was a lot of this kind of concern that we heard when we were preparing to bring folks in. To get around that, we did a lot of education about, helping the campus anyway understand who people were, what the expectations were, what it would look like, and that by the time Twin City 3 actually came to campus, did a lot to lower the anxiety level for people. Perhaps that same community group could do some broader education that would, it gets complicated because we're not a university, it's a bigger group than that, but something around helping people understand both the issues and the causes that we've talked about tonight, but also practically what they look like and what the ongoing checks and balances that can be a really useful.
I do want to draw a comparison between a tent city model because I talked to a coworker of mine who lives up in Ballard, and a tent city went next to her home. And she was worried about it, but it ended up being okay. But the reality is she got to know people who lived there, and it was consistently the same people there every night. And she, was able to actually, it became part of the community. With this model, it's not that way. It's going to be different people probably every night, possibly from other areas of the county. Even though it's not intended to be that way, that's what's going to happen. We're not naive. So when you have people in and out of that building who we haven't seen before, we don't know. I try to get to know my neighbors. I like to know who's around me. It's a lot different.
I think that's a question. I think that we shouldn't, none of us should say that we know what it's going to look like in terms of how long, people will be there and the type of community that's formed. And so, if people are allowed to stay there and store their belongings, it will begin to form community. And so I think that's why talking about the model is really important. And the model can be shifted as well, to try to ensure that we create something helpful. Because I hear your concerns, and I think that there are a lot of concerns being expressed about people not being itinerant and people being rooted and then rooted to have help and making sure that they're getting help to get out.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, if you talk about, from what I understand of homelessness, I've actually have recently met a number of homeless youth I worked with through United Way through their breakfast. And one of them, she can't even stay at a homeless shelter because she works during the night. Because she actually needs to sleep during the day. That's something we haven't thought of, right? Or talked about.
And that's why the 24/7 model is important. I mean, we're not talking about youth right now, but we're talking about that for adults, and so a lot of very low income.
And the other issue, I've heard stories of people trying to go to work and they have to carry their belongings with them. That's very difficult for someone to find a job and to keep a job when they have to carry their belongings with them to work every day. So there's a lot of little things that I think we need to think about when we are talking about a good model for the community, but also for the people who are serving.
Adrian, I would like to share this. It's a hub, a map of the West Seattle. It's more for communication hubs for emergency, but these are possible stations that might be suitable for some type of shelter, and so I can pass it around. But basically, it's West Seattle beprepared.org. So, and there may be almost every area might have something like this that could support some shelters.
I know that.
I was just going to ask, are there going to be, is there going to be some way to measure the success of a shelter so that we know whether or not, is this just people coming and going and if nobody wants help, then they're here for a night or a couple nights and they leave and they go wherever? Is there going to be some way to measure, I don't even call it success, just some measure of that there are actually people that are going to get help or that are getting help, not going to get help, but that are coming in and asking for help? Because I'm really wondering, when you have a shelter, how many people per night actually do ask for some other help?
Yes, absolutely. And so the Homeless Management Information System, which is one of the data points in here, it looks at all of the different types of services that people who are experiencing homelessness are enrolled in, and we hold, and there's more and more of it, and we are working to hold providers even more accountable on certain points, like successful exits to long-term housing solutions. And so agencies won't get funded if they're not successful accomplishing that. Length of time staying in shelters, the idea really is to have people stay in shelters a very short amount of time and get a long-term housing solution. So we will have that data. We won't say, Joe Smith, and this is what happened, but we would be able to tell you, during this particular month or during this whatever time snapshot, X number of people came through. We can give general demographic information about it and talk about what the outcomes were for those individuals. So we
You're
certainly
not
can
getting
report that.
names, and how do you know, how can you
We
track
know the
those
names, we
and
can't
know?
give you the names,
Yeah,
privacy.
okay.
You could say
Yeah.
male, age.
Yeah, we
18,
can
yeah.
say the majority of people, in there were males, whatever, yeah, so we can provide that.
Do you have any percentages of people from other shelters that you worked with that have been housed? Like what's the usual percentage of folks that you serve that you do find housing and stable housing for?
Yeah, I think I don't have the number off the top of my head. It's something I can bring back to the next meeting. I think one of the things that we do know, our Poppy report related is as a swap analysis that we know we need to be doing better in that regard. And we really do need to be looking at shelter as that path and connection to housing. So I think this is all part of that pivot, and as somebody brought up the navigation concept that the city of Seattle is looking at, this wouldn't necessarily be, for all the reasons that Adrian laid out, exactly that model, but this really is designed to move us to where a lot of these reports and a lot of the national best practice really is about getting people connected to housing and moving shelter from being simply a place where somebody comes, stays the night, and leaves at 6 o'clock in the morning to either go to work or go out into the streets.
Barbara, as I recall, the gentleman from the Salvation Army had said 7% was the
Yeah, I remember that.
Oh, 7%? Okay. That's kind of a low number.
I talked to him afterwards, and I think he alluded that it was not this shelter, but a shelter. So I really was confused on that
I
number.
think he may have been, he may have been not clear about the question, Bobby, but there's an important distinction, which is that the shelters that the Salvation Army are running for the county right now are the men on the floor. You line up, we open the doors at 7 o'clock at night. People are exited at 5 o'clock in the morning. So it's a different model. And so, and one of the reasons, and Mark has done a great job outlining why we need to shift the model. I mean, there are other models. There's congregations for the homeless in the Bellevue area, and when they did intensive case management for their men's shelter, they had very good outcomes for that, and they did couples as well too on their sites in Bellevue.
Salvation Army they're not going to be running this?
They will,
site,
yeah.
But it will not be their typical model?
It will not be the model that we have paid for in the county right now.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, because those models have been structured as emergency shelters, and so it really is in the lobby of the King County Administration Building.
Mhm.
So people can't stay there because people are coming through the building at night. So
Yeah.
that's been the structure. I mean,
Yeah.
so we would be interested in if folks have identified other alternative sites. Somebody contacted Mark some time ago about King County's communication building, and both the County Facilities Management Division and Department of Community and Human Service staff went out and took a look at that. We're interested in other facilities that people may be aware of that you would suggest that we take a look at in White Center, so we can provide a resource for people who are homeless in the center.
Pat Thompson actually brought up a really pretty good location. It's about 3 or 4 blocks east of here.
Okay.
But it's closer to First Ave. It's on 112th and 2nd, and it's facing south. I drove past it actually right before this meeting because I did not want to suggest it if I thought it was also going to be near homes. There is an apartment complex next door. However, it is much closer to bus stops on First Ave.
Do you happen to know what it is? What the facility is?
I do not. It's a pinkish building, and the county does own it, according to Pat.
Okay.
Wilderness Technologies in there, or was in there.
She said
But
it's
it's
really
county-owned
big.
property.
Okay.
And it's huge.
It's huge.
Wilderness Technologies?
Was in there, was the nonprofit that was in there. And so I also told, what's your name at the county?
Ballard.
About this case as well. So,
Does it have to be county-owned property?
No, it doesn't, but the benefit of the county-owned property is that we don't have to pay rent for it. And so, I mean, if there's another site that is, no to minimal rent, and so it's another government-owned building that another government agency would be willing to, open up and pay utilities and things like that.
But speaking of the budget, so would they be able to use emergency funds like FEMA or, there's different emergency funds that might just fund the 24/7 type, just go right for the thing that we know is working and houses, like that to me seems like the best use of money because we know that institutionalizing and tents aren't working and it's 30 years of that.
We need a lot of system reform, right? Believe me, we're trying to.
But I was thinking
we're trying to do all those things.
Use
You're
some
absolutely
budget
right.
money for that, then go right for what is working and,
Yeah, we're trying to do that.
I'd just like to, I can bring up, on October 5th, there was a fiscal management meeting in King County, in which John Wilson, who's the county assessor, was present, and Rod Dembowski at that time, who's one of the council members, had asked Mr. Wilson for a list of properties that the county owned that I think were not currently being used. Maybe they were excess properties. And so that can be obtained. I'm sure you can obtain it quicker than I've asked, and I've been waiting. I've not heard back from somebody. And also during that meeting, it was brought up that Mr. Wilson had provided a Seattle City Council member with a list of properties not only owned by King County, but also owned by the city of Seattle. So there are lists out there, and that apparently was given, I think it was to Gene Godden, I'm not, no.
And Councilmember Colwell's.
Colwell, well, no, there was somebody on the city.
Oh, the Seattle,
City of
yes,
Seattle.
Councilmember Seattle,
That-
actually.
So there
Yes.
are lists out there of properties, and it was specifically for this type of thing.
And
So
those- and-
to
and
try to ask
clarify,
us to
yeah.
identify when you
So we
guys
we
have
those-
lists.
We have those lists, and so
Okay.
those are the lists that have generated a site in Kenmore, a site in Bellevue, this site, and so those are,
Can we
those
get a
are.
copy of those lists so we know what properties? Because
Yes.
if you already
Yeah.
have those lists,
Yeah.
then you should
Right.
know what properties
Right.
are in the area
Right.
that
Do you able to
we
send
could
that out to
utilize.
everyone on that
Sure.
email list?
I know there's a surplus one where it's substations, and I've gone through that whole, PDF file. It's pretty extensive, but I think those were more for housing, but I don't know why they couldn't be for.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for something that has a facility.
Already
so,
has a- yeah.
So something that has a substation, that has a building.
Yeah.
That people can go into.
That's just one category.
What about the DSHS building?
The bottom of it is being built out by CMAR to open a youth addiction center, and also offer other health and mental services. So it's being utilized quite well, actually. I'm going to take the opportunity since my mouth is open now.
Go for it.
I'm sorry that I was late, so if I am repeating things that have already been discussed, please forgive me. I'm representing the business district. I am the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and a lot of concern falls under the county representing the business district without any formal communication with us.
And Molly, I just want to clarify, I am not sure where that happened, because the county has not, didn't in any way, shape, or form communicate a position that the chamber had taken on this. There was an email that was sent out, it was not by the county, so there was confusion over that, but it was not generated by the county.
Okay, so I appreciate knowing that, but the result of what was said created a backlash calling for a resident boycott of the business district and my business personally, which is, I don't know if it's going to have any formal effect or not, but the miscommunication or the lack of communication at this point is so far gone that we have so many things that we need to deal with that I am aware of on a daily basis in our area. And then to bring in this sort of calamity amongst the residents and the business district, it really makes us wonder where our county and our government's priorities are. And it makes it extremely difficult to try to tend to the things that we need on a daily basis, i.e. safety, sanitation. You know, those two things are enormous issues within our area. And now the county is proposing spending an enormous amount of money on another situation rather than focusing on the ones that have been around for so long. One of my major concerns, and this is a personal concern, I'm not representing the chamber when I say this, but I've taken the time when I found out about the shelter on a Wednesday from the gentleman who decided that my organization was trying to shove the homeless out of the business district and put them in the middle of our residential area. I personally and my organization have had plans and do on a daily basis work with these people. I went out every day for a week. I would close my business and I'd walk home and I would talk to the people I came across on the streets who know who I am, because if they're digging in my trash can in front of my building, I bring them food and send them on their way so that they don't have to dig in a trash can. And ask the simple question, is a night in a bed or a fundamental resource center, of those two items, which is more important in your life? And what I found is the people that live here in White Center that are on the streets, they have chosen, the majority of them have chosen to do that. They've taken it on as a lifestyle, which to me is completely acceptable. But to prioritize a group of people who have the city and the state and the county have done an amazing job at providing resources. And every single one of these people that I've spoken to are aware of how to get these resources, what they are, where they are. And the ones who choose to take advantage of those resources are. The ones who we are communicating about choose not to use those resources. So fundamentally, we are taking a group of people who've made a lifestyle choice and putting them into a residence and calling it low barrier so that we can get them into that residence, but we're not allowing children there. And the problem with that, for me, is if we aren't allowing children in, how are we going to place those perceptually dangerous people in the middle of them? So I really need that to be considered. The organization that runs the tent cities have made a publication on their blog saying that these folks are making a lifestyle choice. It is a lifestyle choice. I don't feel like any of my lifestyle choices necessarily need to be funded by my government, in my opinion. Also, the Chamber of Commerce would like to step up and offer its assistance. We have a resource model in mind. I have access to Workfare, which is a group of about 5,000 volunteers that need to have volunteer hours through the state. There's lots of great ways to provide resources to people who would like to have them. But to force this kind of underprotected facility in the middle of a neighborhood who is on a daily basis trying to protect their children and themselves and their property is a mistake, in my opinion. I am really upset that the chamber wasn't involved in this, and I've been a year and a half as the president of the Chamber of Commerce. And right now I should be worrying about pumpkin carving contests and Christmas festivals, but instead I'm answering to people as if I am a representative of their government, because of the distress that the decisions that you folks are making is creating. So, thank you.
Is there a budget for the shelter? I mean, I know there is, but do you have numbers? And what are they?
I don't know off the top of my head, I don't know Mark knows off the top of my head.
I think the shelter, typically, I mean, if we look at sort of what we're expecting, I think it's about 60,000 or so a month to operate a shelter, so it's, whether that is $700,000. And I think it really depends on the model ultimately, particularly if we're looking to bring in services and connecting people to housing. So I think one of the things that we've talked about here is what our potential shelter, what our potential model changes. So if it was more hours, if there were more services, I think so that changes the model concept that we need to sort of sort through. And I think the other piece is to somebody's point on the expectations, and we have, we work to bring people through that in a 30-day period of time and connect them with housing. I think we also know that connecting at that level is a pretty intensive level of work. So it isn't necessarily inexpensive, but it is ultimately rewarding for those people and for the communities where we're able to sort of have that impact.
Are you aware that we don't even, the county doesn't even pay to have the trash cans emptied on 15th, 16th, and 17th? You know that we, through personal relationships with the DOC, that we have the work crew come through. You realize that we have the DOC help us with the spring clean every year, where we go to elderly people and the mentally handicapped and these people who cannot get any other resources. We take the DOC in and utilize them. They put our lights on our trees at Christmas. We have 6 officers to respond to Vashon Island, King, White Center, and Skyway. And now we have the concern, not only are we underprotected, not only are we under-sanitized, but we're going to bring in another drove of people who we possibly may need protected from. We are going to absolutely need more sanitation resources. That's a lot of our concern in the business district. I mean, I personally pay these guys. I have 2 trash pickers in my shop, and they know that if they need money, they can come to me, and I will send them out to clean the streets, and I will take the money out of my till from the business that is being affected by your decisions and pay them to clean our streets. We have dead trees in the business district. We have a plethora of really large concerns, and every time that these concerns are brought to the county, they are pacified, under-answered, and then we get presented with situations like this.
Well, I can speak for the Human Services Department, and we are happy to work with you and address issues. And in the beginning, we outlined that in part the idea for the shelter was in response to concerns that we have heard over the years about people who are homeless in White Center. One of the things that you've probably heard on the budget hearings is that the county budget situation is a mess, and it's not to excuse it, and I don't know, I know very little except for what you just said about sanitation or things like that. What I can tell you about our budget within the Department of Community and Services is that less than 1% of the budget is general fund, less than 1% of the budget. And so the money that we are talking about to fund shelters or other things like that is pass-through dollars from the state and federal government. And so, even if we all as a group agreed that we should be carving out money to do some of those very important things that you mentioned, we could not do that with this money. And so I know that our elected officials are working very hard, every single one of them, to try to change the budget situation, but it's extremely challenging.
I would love to send an invitation to these elected officials to come down and actually meet people. I believe that not only would it be a great piece of PR for these people, I think it would help the community be able to identify who it is making these decisions. And like a lot of folks said, just being accountable to responding to the messages that we've been sending really is something that needs to be taken seriously, because at this point, in just a few minutes I've been here, many people have expressed the lack of faith and trust in our government. And the officials that I work with, i.e. the fire department and the sheriff's department and the CDA and a few of the other organizations, the NUAC Council, we're all extremely concerned citizens, and we're all extremely willing and ready to help. But you folks don't show up and you don't respond, and it makes us feel like that one, our voices don't matter, or two, you know how we feel, and it is something that you're not considering.
They say it was expressed, Seeley mentioned about the, it being like a family shelter. Is there any way that you will change? Because I think that a family shelter would probably go over 100% better.
Or a youth
there
shelter,
in that
or
spot than.
We will certainly look at it. I mean, we have to look at the number, we would like to look at the numbers of homeless families from this area, and just to clarify, based on the fund source, I mean, everything is, you know, fund sources are always odd and not necessarily logical, but there's a different definition for homelessness for school districts under federal law than for homeless dollars. And so for homeless dollars, people need to be what's called literally homeless. So they need to be living in a place that is either on the streets or unfit for human habitation. Within the school district definition, it can be people who are doubled or tripled up, but they're in housing. And so what we would need to clarify in order to use the money that we have available is whether they are families who are literally homeless. And so we will commit to you to underdo that work and to investigate that.
What about the resources, like the Victory Outreach program that is already here on First, and there's another one right there across the street from Stephen Cox Park. Why wouldn't it be more viable to work and subsidize the programs that already exist within the community rather than trying to bring in new ones that might not be as effective?
So did Victory Outreach or the Stephen Cox Park facility, do they have shelter here?
Yeah, they do. They have a pain and sober shelter. There are quite a few houses that provide rooms for folks to get clean and sober, and then once they are, encourage them to work and then help them reassimilate back into a regular society. There are a lot of options already available to folks in our area. And so that brings me back to the concern that the options that are here aren't being utilized or are underfunded themselves to be more effective. And so again, why recreate the wheel rather than putting a new tire on it? I don't understand that. The biggest concern is our children, our children, our children. This is 2,500 children that you're dropping, these 70 people that you're not going to know anything about in the middle of. You're not even going to let them in the door. You know, I mean,
We had some clarity around the model, and we have to catch up with you.
And
Sure.
the sheriff's
Yeah.
moving in across the street
at the Steve Cox
yeah,
Park.
so you've got.
You know, they took the chamber's cabin
Yeah.
in order to be there. And,
Don't have to worry
you know,
about security
in
issues.
order for that to be utilized, I would be extremely satisfied if the county stepped in with those two nonprofit organizations that are already doing amazing work with the community, with the actual people who are in here, and offered assistance rather than trying to start something new, which is. I really don't want to know the things that are going to happen for you guys to go, oops.
Many years ago, I was a youth minister at it was called the Cross Discipleship and one of the differences, I think, if I'm understanding it all right, between this model and that one is that's residential. There's a program. This would allow people to come in, access the pieces of services that they need. Whereas, 10 years ago, the program at the Cross was you're in for, I think it was 90 days, and then you can begin to move out. And so they are a little different. But it would be cool, coming back to your Patrick's idea about the community council thing, those are excellent points of connection. I mean, those folks know folks who extending the outreach piece, that's a really good idea.
I think that if emergency shelter is, if you're worried about these folks being out in the cold and freezing, or these folks' lives being put at risk because of the decisions that they're making, whether they are addiction-induced or mentally ill or whatever reason they're making these decisions, then I think that an emergency shelter situation is a far cry from a low barrier model in the middle of our schools. In my perception, I think that if you had, I believe someone else had mentioned, more than one nonprofit organization, so the CDA and the Chamber of Commerce were housed in this area, and we provided a resource center and were able to open the doors on nights like that, I think that would be a lot more fundamentally valuable to the people that we're trying to serve here. I know that the Chamber itself spent a lot of money helping clean up this park and renaming it for the neighborhood, and now one of my major concerns is there are very few parks that aren't homeless people's homes. You know, and this is one of them. This park here is extremely valued by the neighbors.
And you know, we share the same goal of trying to make sure that the people who are in parks have places to go, and so we do share that goal. And the question is how we get there and what the best way is to get there.
So then my answer to that question is that if you insist on using this building, you need to reconsider the model which you've already spoken to, but allowing the community organizations that are already here who are willing to step up and say that I have time, resources, and the energy to help you run the process, and then allow us to run it as an emergency center. I can guarantee you that anybody sitting in this room would not be as angry or worried as they are if we said it's going to be 32 degrees tonight and the CDA and Chambers office.
I just want to clarify, because the intent is not to have an emergency shelter, and one of the reasons we talked about earlier is because emergency shelters don't work in helping people get out of homelessness.
Right. So what I was offering, what my suggestion is to create a resource center that will function as the resource center that you're speaking of, and allowing it to be an emergency shelter rather than bringing these folks. This shelter model is a bed for these folks to sleep in. You're going to let them in high, you're going to let them in drunk, you're going to let them in any way, shape, or form that they come to you, which is acceptable on the humane level. However, to utilize so much money and so many resources for, again, I'm going to harp on this, a lifestyle choice is, in my opinion, a mistake. If we have organizations like the CDA and the Chamber of Commerce living in this building with my access to 5,000 volunteers, not only could we have volunteers walking the neighborhoods, we could have volunteers in the space. We can bring Navos in, which makes it an on-site resource. We can bring in the DHSH, which makes it an on-site resource. All of these resources that are scattered about the area can sit in a place where there's a washer and a dryer, where there's a shower, where there is a computer, where there's an address and a phone number that can be given when people who are deciding to utilize the resources that are available to them can be given to an employer. A daycare center can be open. There's plenty of room over there, and we have the people who have the willpower and the willingness to do it, which all of these things could have been told to you a year ago and offered up a year ago. And now you're faced with a community that is so untrusting of you. Unless you make the right decision in this, I'm afraid that you're going to have 3 years worth of turmoil over it. And what has to happen within the shelter for you guys to realize that maybe you should have listened to the people who are concerned. You know, I feel like the meeting that we had with them, with the first meeting that we had, I spent a week I'm going to be diplomatic. I'm going to be diplomatic. I'm going to offer valid points of interest. And then I get in there and I've got 2 minutes to talk. And then because of the things that were done previous this meeting, The minute I say that I'm the president of the Chamber of Commerce, 180 people instantly angered at me. You know, and that is, and Mark, I want to apologize if you felt attacked that day, because I was rather emotional.
That's all right.
But I felt 180 people that I work on a daily basis trying to be part of this community with, angry at me, personally. And I feel like as a government entity, you should be a little more responsible. You should be held responsible for these decisions and choices that you're making.
I'm gonna also add, I started the petition. I don't know if you've gotten updates from that. You should have.
Yeah.
And I hope you are reading the comments, because we do have 660 people who have signed it, and they all are residents of this community for the most part. And I have to speak on their behalf, because this is not the right location. And thank you, Bobby, for continuously for what you're trying to do. And the reality is that it needs to be, the community needs to be involved and accept the location and be okay with that. Another point I want to make, because Joseph was not invited to this meeting, he does share a fence, and I know he's very emotional about this issue, and he stood up multiple times yelling during that meeting, but he shares a fence with that property. He has 2 very young children, adorable kids, and if I don't have kids, I see the kids walk by. If I was in his position, I would be pissed beyond, and he is, and I frankly don't blame him. I think both of you and whoever else is involved in making that decision needs to really examine how you would feel in that situation, because it's unnerving to think that you wouldn't know who was in and out of that space, and your children are playing in that yard. And I know not everyone's dangerous. I'm totally aware of that, but the reality is not also, we're not naive, and you just don't know. You just don't know.
And I think it really needs to be pointed out, we're not against these people.
No, not at all.
We're not against the people. The people
a little
themselves are in our community. And we all have concern, and we all make our own attempts at helping these people. And it's not that we aren't, it's not that we're blaming the folks or their needs for the situation. It really is a lack in faith in the people who are supposed to be protecting everybody in this situation.
So I think, so people have provided a lot of really important comments, and we appreciate that. I think there's probably more out of the rain, out of the cold, and have a place where they can receive services and get their lives back into a place where they're able to have a long-term housing solution. And so that's what we are attempting to do for those people who are here in this community. And
Please
so,
communicate with us, because there's a huge opportunity here for us, for all of us, especially with the large as that property is and the amount of people who really want to be part of this. That you have a huge.
I think Owen was raising his hand, and then Liz has something.
And just quickly, does the old location of the White Center Library, 160, does that fall into the?
It's also next to a school.
Is it? It is?
Yes, it's
Okay.
also next to a school.
And
Right.
it's very.
Right, okay, so capacity, that I remember
But
that.
I think the
just-
Montessori school is fine.
It is,
Oh.
it's right.
Yeah.
next
Yeah.
door. Yeah.
I also want to add, I have heard the Rocks Hill Elementary School is closing next year, and might be a good location. It's very close to a bus that I need on the 120 that goes downtown. It's super close to Target and grocery stores and Safeway, which I don't want these people to also become food desert, which is.
Well, you know, with the
something
food
that
bank
we're
being
aware
right
of.
here, and nobody was ever angry with the county health center there. Nobody was upset when it was a viable, fundamental resource. And I think that if you were to jump back on that frame of mind, I think you'd find a lot more support.
They are. I mean, we are planning on redeveloping our property. The CDA and Southwest Youth Empowerment Services and Food Bank will be sharing, and hopefully we'll be sharing that space to create that kind of community resource that we're talking. But that's a few years out.
Why is it years out? I don't understand if this is if this is a here and now situation, why is the right answer a few years out rather than an immediate?
Yeah, so I think, I can talk a little bit about it, Steve, you can talk about it too. These, the ideas and the concepts for redevelopment projects take some period of time to coalesce, both around design and concept and partnership, and also around ultimately funding and building. I mean, typically, these processes from the time that they are conceptualized to the time that somebody starts construction is 3, 4, 5 years down the road. I mean, these take millions of dollars and a variety of funding sources. It does not include just one source. So it isn't just the county that would fund this, or just the state or something along those lines. So it takes a while to piece these concepts together. And I think the base concept was there's a facility that has a long-term use, or potentially a long-term use, kind of along with what you're saying as well, Bobby, about Community Resource Center. And that's great and exciting. And we have a period of time where it is not being used for anything. And also facing sort of the homeless problem that we've all described. And so can we use our facilities in a way that they actually serve sort of temporary interim uses and long-term uses? So that's kind of the why it takes a while and why we're kind of where we're at. I don't know, Steve, if I...
No, I can keep
So Liz, you can do that.
I've now got 2 comments. To get back to the concentration of poverty, I think that's a conversation that should go around any reuse of the building. I totally support the community center aspect, but I think concentrating poverty, if you look at that sheet I dispersed, we've already got a whole bunch more than we need, and we've got more poor people here than we can help or offer healthy living and healthy neighborhood too. So that's that comment. The other is, we've been asking you to communicate with us. Would you please communicate also with your bosses, Mr. Constantine, Mr. McDermott, the other council members? They need to know, because they seem to be more than happy to kind of use White Center as a guinea pig. And I think we're tired of it. And it's not healthy. They're doing it with marijuana. That's money. That would have
It has nothing to do with Okay, so
okay.
that's fair
Please
enough.
ask
Okay, so we encourage folks to, and Mark, should you be the point of contact if you have other alternative sites?
Yes, please do.
So we've got a lot of sorting to do
Right.
Here with this information, and we will, our hope is to come back and talk to this group again as a next step. And so, I don't know, I'm guessing maybe 2 weeks?
I would
It's
think-
maybe shorter than that.
I was thinking 2 weeks. There's a fair amount of things to talk through here as far as models and concepts. I want to follow
We
up
need
with
to,
Bob.
I mean, there are a lot of things that we do need to follow up on and things that we need to research as well. So we will plan on, we'll work with Sealy and figure out if we can generously use the space again and look at.
Can I just reiterate, I personally would like Steely, Bobby, and Liz to all be on any communication you have. I think that there are some bottlenecks happening, and I think it's important that it's across all of our leadership in this community.
I think I have
I'd be
everybody's
happy to
email
do
address
that.
except for
That's
Bobby's.
right. It would be nice to have solid answers to what have to be solved questions.
Is there a projected start date at all, or a hope or anything like that?
Well, I mean, we're balancing 2 things here. One is to look at other things that people are looking at, and then also the recognition that, I mean, we had some of the worst weather we have had. We've had more rainfall in the month of October. I mean, we set a new record. I heard in the news before I got over here. I mean, people need to have an opportunity to come indoors. So, I mean, spending a year, trying to work this out probably is not in the best interest of the other citizens that we are representing too, and some whose lives are maybe in danger.
But it's not like
So-
November 6th.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Not at all.
Great.
Are the current shelters that are open, are they full every night?
That's a hard question to
There's
answer.
generally capacity in different shelters, and it depends on, some may be overflow at a certain night, and then we have a system that tries to move people to another location. They are generally full though.
We opened another emergency shelter over the weekend to try to, because of the storms, and so that's a temporary emergency settle. The city of Seattle opened Seattle Center for doing that too, and so, in cases like that, and people go in the extremely cold weather, people go in, and that's when you see how many homeless people there really are, because, you've got people in the shelters, and then you open up these extra shelters, you suddenly have a lot more people coming in. So, thank you all really very much
Can I make
for your
one more
time.
comment? Can you look at also our resources as far as police officers and fire department and EMT? Because I do work in Pioneer Square across from a service center, and on a daily basis it's visited by the police 3 to 4 times maybe, and EMTs at
I
least
would ask
twice
that
a
policing
day.
questions that you direct to the sheriff. I don't have any ability to do any kind of work comparing what the sheriff's practices are to the city of Seattle Police Department.
Well, I'm just saying in terms of location and figuring out if this is a viable option for us, because if we're already understaffed and we're gonna lose potentially EMTs and our fire department, a majority of them, because I think there's maybe 5 people, I think our fire chief said, at the site, and they lose 3 every time an EMT is called to that site, because those are going to be folks that are in need of help in that way. Like I said, I see it every day out my
I don't
window.
know, I think that we've had very few EMT calls to the King County emergency shelters. I don't know that we've actually had any there, and so, I think that, I mean, some of those things may not be true. I mean, we're not talking about a shelter like the Morrison Shelter in downtown Seattle. That's a different type of shelter. There are a lot of EMT calls there, and that's not what we're talking about.
It seems like part of the thing that keeps coming up is this fundamental, I don't know if it's a disagreement about whether most of the folks in the shelter are homeless folks that are already in White Center or not. Because if they're already in White Center, then all those resources that we're talking about are already being used right here in White Center, right? And if they're not, then that's a different issue, and I don't know if that's been quite called out, but I feel like that's something that I hear going on.
I think it has been, I think it just hasn't been resolved.
Yeah.
Because
So
I
if we
don't
don't
think
need
that
it,
a straight
why-
answer you can't say, oh, you can't turn people away from not being in the area.
Right, but I don't mean whether no one is allowed, I'm not talking about a gate, I'm
Sure.
talking about what folks predict is likely to happen, that concept is that the shelter is here because there are a lot of homeless folks that are right here that there are plenty of local homeless folks to fill that shelter, and that if that's really true, then the shelter would be full from folks who are here. And if that's not true, then that would be a different, it's a totally different issue from sort of whether people are allowed in or not. It's
Well,
more
and
this
it's kind of a
balancing.
conversation also with other shelters in the area, because if they're going to be, or other services in the area, right, in Seattle, if they're gonna be sending people.
One of the things I
Well,
did find out,
when there's not a shelter in this community now, so anyone that's homeless here now has to go to Seattle or go to Burien or something.
to lean on that, a lot of the folks that are here don't go into Seattle to use
Right.
the facilities to wash their
That's what you guys
clothes.
were saying, folks
Or,
do when they are.
you know, that,
Right.
what is that street behind REI where they can go wash their clothes and take a shower and get a meal on Wednesday?
Like the low, yeah, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
and that's exactly what we were talking about earlier, that people stay, if
Where they
people
are.
have, where they are, there's a connection to community, and that's why it's important to have a shelter and resources to help people get out of that situation within the community.
So if
And
they're
that's the
concerned
goal.
though about homeless folks in White Center, there are already homeless folks in White Center, right?
And they're in the schools.
Yeah, well, there are homeless folks everywhere, because people are.
Am I misunderstanding that, there's not going to be shower facilities available to the people in the shelter?
What we have talked about doing is bringing in temporary shower facilities, not creating a whole new plumbing system within the building, because we think the longer term intent is probably to have it redeveloped or demolished, and so there are ways to
One
bring in
shower there
temporary.
right now, that used to be my work building.
So there are some abilities to do that, yeah.
I think that's really
Important.
important.
Really important.
Yeah.
Well, and that goes, I think, to the larger question of like, what's the model and how do we,
Sure.
I think you've had raised questions, others have raised questions about, is there a way that the model addresses some of these concerns too? And so I think
Absolutely.
that's one of those
I think that is the answer.
And it sounded like the sheriff was saying that we don't really have that problem. I mean, in other words, why are we building it here if we don't have the need when we're already, you know, the whole community is already burdened, and he was saying there was 12 to 24, you know.
Well, and you get the one that
Yeah,
got.
there's discrepancy for sure.
Yeah,
between
and it's
the
car
two
campers
numbers.
and it's folks.
Right.
Well, there
But
are,
those are
there
Seattle.
are,
I mean,
No, the one that count numbers say that
Oh,
those
okay.
folks are in White Center.
there are homeless people here in White Center,
Right.
and to think that there aren't would be a mistake.
No, the sheriff gave some
But
numbers, yeah. The last
well,
one.
and I think what the sheriff was speaking to is the crime and problems that are being,
No, it was
dealt
directly
with.
related to the shelter, to the shelter. It was the last meeting I can,
So-
I mean, just saying, you know.
Mark,
why are
didn't you
we-
say that there was something like 100 home?
Yeah, so I got
residents?
the, I actually.
So we really have about 400 people that are affecting White Center, but most of them live on the other side of the line.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
they clarified there.
Exactly the point, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're making the point.
So again, thank you all very much. Thank you very much to Sealy for hosting us. Thank you all for your time. And so we will communicate both on interim things with Sealy, Bobby, Liz, and to the broader community too. We will get out a broader community notification that the intent is not to open a shelter on November 1st, that we've got more work to do. And at the same time, we will.
The Chamber of Commerce will put a page on its website regarding the situation. So if you have any questions that aren't being answered, I will do my best to make sure that we, whatever information is provided to me, I can put on the White Center.
I did see it.
And Bobby, if you or
Chamber of
Liz or
Commerce.
anyone at Sealy are hearing questions, we encourage you to ask us those questions, because there was, you know, there has been misinformation disseminated, whether it was the chamber's position, and so we encourage you to check in with us to find out if something you're hearing is accurate. We'll gladly clarify for you. So.
I mean, I think a lot of it is, I don't think there's a lot of questions other than the ones that we've all presented. I think it's all falling back on anger and fear. And we're not able to address anger and fear without proper information. You know, I can pour as many cups of coffee and pat as many back as I can get my hands on, but it's still not going to create any faith in our government body right now because of the decisions that have already been made.
Well, you know, I think what I heard from a lot of my neighbors is the frustration that this community has been so neglected.
And we are.
My street, I
We
mean,
absolutely are.
we have to take care of our own streets. We basically have to go out and clean up all our own trash.
Do you realize that in the transportation department, we are like level 5, which means that if we need any kind of major street repair, it's to be returned to gravel. And that includes the business district.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think we're preaching to the choir.
Sure,
Because
sure.
the ironic thing about this is that White Center, people view White Center as a marginalized community. And so this is happening, really? So I think that was the, kind of the reaction. And so what was really unfortunate was the fact that this community knows how to take care of this community.
Because we
And
have
so-
had to for so long.
Absolutely, and that, we know we have homeless folks here, we wanna be part of the solution as well.
Yeah.
And
And I
so
think
it's
one
an
thing that-
opportunity to
Right.
build relationships, build some accountability, with each other, around this work. And communication is really hard when you're talking about, 15,000 residents. But what keeps coming back to me consistently is the fact that people wanna figure this out together.
Mhm.
And so, which I feel good about, because I know, this is an amazing community. So, the more folks, I love the idea, let's not bottleneck the information. I feel
Sure.
like the CDA really took a beating through this, but trying to get information out. But that's community work, so that's fine. If it means that the end result is that we do something collectively, that's great. And so, the ability to push the county to not only Adrian, but, down, and to hear that, have them, make sure they're hearing our voices, I don't think it's a bad thing. But, you know, I know we also want to build relationships of trust in this community with our folks that we're partnering with. So, the way that and then everybody has their own approach. So mine, you know, the way, you know, as a Samoan woman, you know, our culture, we don't shame people into doing the right thing. It really is, how do we just get people together and to kind of hash stuff out and really build trust and to do it in a respectful way, so all our voices are heard and that we continue to take care of each other and solve the problems of this community as a collective. So, that was the attempt to making the suggestion for that tonight. So glad to have the people in the room right now around this conversation. And I just feel, I'm very thankful to all of you for coming and taking time out of your schedules. And the county folks.
Yeah,
because
thank
I
you
know-
for being willing to be a washboard for a second.
Yeah.
And a soundboard, because a lot of people, I know that meeting that really turned out bad. I had to leave straight after I decided to run out, but.
So in a couple weeks, we're looking at 2
Yeah.
weeks. Everybody look for emails from me and Liz and Bobby.
Thank you.
And we will try to get.
And visit whitecenternow.com is the chamber's website, and I will work with my staff
To post stuff, and we will
to
post
post
stuff
stuff
on
and
the
make sure that
CA.
it's on there.
And, yeah. You guys eat some pizza.
Take care of it.